Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for March 2022. It's been a great month in the project. We've had around 105 people adding 1,600 commits or so to the repository. I myself spent basically the whole month working on the ACID 3 browser test, but more about that later. Now let's take a look around the system and see what's new. All right, so this is the SerenityOS desktop as it looks today, end of March 2022. And the first thing I want to show you from this month is smooth scrolling. So all of our GUI views now have this smooth scroll animation. When you make these big jumps in scrolling, we no longer just snap to the new location, but rather it just kind of animates very nicely. And it's a subtle effect, but it just looks really, really nice, I think. And this was implemented by For Love of Cats. So thank you very much, For Love of Cats. And also in the terminal, you can actually opt out of it. So in the terminal, it's off by default. And that was done by MacDo because it was kind of awkward to have animated scrolling in the terminal. But in most other places, it makes sense. So this is now available everywhere that you use our GUI library. It just comes for free. So look at that. Very, very neat. Anyway, let's look at something else. So Pixel Paint saw some development this month. Two main things I wanted to show you. So the first one is we now have a cut action. So you can cut and then paste. Works exactly as you might expect. But it's a good thing to have, and that was implemented by Karol, so thank you, Karol. And then Tobias added a mask feature, so I can create a mask for this layer, and then I can draw a little bit on the mask to create some interesting, what do you call it? Some interesting holes here, I guess. And if I then draw, you'll see that the layer is masked by the mask layer. So I'm not particularly adept at using this feature yet. I'm still learning about it, but I think it seems to have great utility. So thank you very much, Tobias, for adding that. And that's the main stuff from Pixel Paint. We also have a new game this month. For all of you Wordle fans out there, we have Masterword, which was added by Joe. And I haven't been playing Wordle myself, but I saw somewhere that you're supposed to start with a rise or a rose or something like that. And then I guess you go from there. So I don't know. I'm not going to embarrass myself by failing at this game. But you can play it now. It's called Masterword, so check that out. And in the font editor, we have some interesting features that I think I didn't show you before, so I wanted to make sure I show it off. So one thing that's really cool, I think, is you can select many glyphs here, and then you can copy a block of glyphs and then just paste that block somewhere else. And now you can also undo and redo, and it totally works with these multi-glyph blocks. And this was done by Thank You Very Cool. So thank you very cool. That is very cool. And of course, there's so much work on our fonts happening, a bunch of people contributing, and it's really, really awesome to see. In fact, let me show you, there is a web page on serenityos.net/fonts, I think it is. Nope, that was not it. Fonts.serenityos.net. This is not my server, but rather it is Jeje's website, where he has a bunch of information about ongoing stuff with font development for the system. So you can see like how many glyphs each of our different bitmap fonts has, and Katica is our most our most font, and 7,603 glyphs. And this is a really neat website, actually. It shows like the people who have contributed to the font. And you can also see information about the font here. Very, very, very cool, actually. So fonts.serenityOS.net. Check that out, especially if you're involved in working on the fonts. Anyway, just wanted to mention that I'm not as involved with the fonts as I was in the beginning. I'm really happy to see that other people have picked it up and are now working on those, because it's really, really cool if you go to something like Wikipedia in the browser, which hopefully will load now, kind of loads. And it's just so cool that you can see, even with our homegrown bitmap fonts, you'll see that like these glyphs from all kinds of other languages actually render. Like, sure, there are some missing, but the coverage is just so much better than the original English alphabet only that I added early on. So super, super big thanks to everybody working on the fonts. Absolutely love your work. Keep it up. Anyway, let's look at Calculator, because I wanted to show you a little thing from that. So now keyboard input has become a lot nicer in the Calculator. You can type, and while you're typing, the buttons animate as if you're clicking on them. And this is like a subtle thing, but it just feels so good. And this mechanism was added by For Love of Cats, and it's called like mimic pressing, I think. And you can basically tell a button to mimic the user pressing on it, so it just looks like the user did, even though they're actually keystrokes. Love it. Absolutely love it. And I guess now is a good time to hand it over to Linus, who's going to talk a bit about web tech.
All right, so let's look at the changes in the JavaScript engine from March. So most of the efforts have been in Libweb and the browser in general, but there's a couple of things that we can look at regardless. And as usual, at the beginning, let me quickly tell you about our test2tix toScore, which still doesn't render in the browser because of missing fetch. So no image here, but the AST mode, so the default mode went only up slightly from about 80.4 to 80.7%. Still a small increase. But bytecode mode, however, went up by a whole 25%. So that's really amazing work. Most of that by Ali and Luke. So let's have a look at that. So the issue with bytecode basically is that we cannot generate bytecode for all the various language features yet. So different statements, things like that. So step by step, new generation gets added basically, and then we support new constructs. And so for example, Ali did the with statement. So if I run JS with, we have an option called -d for dump bytecode. We can see, and also /b for run bytecode. So if I do js-db, and then put in a string, so you can see that's the generated bytecode up here. So we have a bytecode operation specifically for creating a string, and then it runs the thing. So let's have a look at some examples. So Ali did the with statement. So you can say with some object, and let's say a is 1 in here, and in here we console.log a. So a is not defined anywhere but in that object. But thanks to the, I mistyped console. Thanks to the with statement, a will be just available in the scope. And so you can see we create an object, and then have a new operation, enter object environment, and then do all these stuff for the console.log. So that's one example. I also did for off and for in statements. So for example, I can say for var foo of 1, 2, and 3, do nothing. And so as you can see, we have a new array operation, which creates the array. We have a get iterator, which is internally used for the iteration. And so that now works. And also object literals. So not only the basic case of a single property, but also things like getters. So you can say get foo return 1. And so that internally generates a new function, as you can see by this operation. And then it also has a put by ID operation with now a kind. So which has setter, getter, spread operation, things like that. And as I said, Luke also did a bunch of that. So they implemented a delete operator. So very simple, var foo is 1, and then delete foo. As you can see, there's new operation delete variable, which simply looks up from the identifier table the thing 0 here, which is foo. And Luke also did new.target and various fixes for environment setup and some other fixes in bytecode. So really great work by both of you. And then we have a new feature, which is resizable array buffers. So that's not actually from this month, but it got merged this month, so it didn't get included in the previous month. And so the way that works is that you make a buffer. So and then you pass a size as usual, let's say 10 bytes. But now it gains some options. So we can say max byte length is 100. And, oh, I'm still running in bytecode mode here, so that's not enough. And so we get a regular buffer allocating 10 bytes, as you can see down here, all zeros. But the maximum size is 100 bytes. And so that buffer now has a resizable property, which tells us if we can resize the buffer, and it also has a resize function, which we can pass any value, for example, 50. And now looking at that buffer again, tells us it grew to 50 bytes. And we can also shrink it to back to 10. Or increase it all the way to 100. But what we cannot do is increase it above that limit. So 1,000, for example, would throw. And that was implemented by Julia, also known as For Love of Cats, by her GitHub handle. And this is part of a stage 3 proposal, I believe. And then some general maintenance work. So Tim did a lot of updates to the Intel implementation, where they did a bunch of spec changes, and I did the same for temporal and the shadow realm. All right, so let's have a look at all the browser changes from March, which is a whole lot, because this month we managed to get the ACID 3 test to 100 of 100 points. So fully passing it, which is incredible. So this has been ongoing work for a while, and then this month many people worked on it until it was completed. So as you can see, it's a custom font here, Arial, and all these colored boxes means that like certain subtests are completed. Previously they used to be like gray. And so as I said, a whole bunch of people have worked on this, and obviously it also improved other websites as a result of that, because that's just like testing regular web features. For example, Ali added a whole XML parser for this, which now lives in libxml and can pass XHTML. And Andreas obviously worked on this, so he's done over 270 commits in the browser alone this month. So way too many for me to show you all. But there's been everything from improvements in style computation to layout to painting, performance work. DOM APIs like the range and everything in between. So really, really good work by Andreas, who is still the main person pushing this browser forward. And also Idan, Sam, Simon, Sinak, Tim, who's done a bunch of work on HTML elements and SVG, and some other people that I'm forgetting right now. So this is super exciting. And what else? So we have a new website running, so specifically targeting a game this time. So that's obviously improving the Canvas stuff. It's called playbiolab.com. And so this is quite an old game, I think about 10 years old. And it's implemented using HTML5 Canvas. As you can see, it loads relatively quickly here. Smooth animation, and I can actually play this. So it's not 60 FPS, but it's definitely playable. And so this was done by Idan, who's done a bunch of work on the canvas, and myself, who's also done a bunch of work on the canvas. And then Andreas did some final performance work to make it a lot more playable. And so it's really nice to just see like a full game working in this browser now. And see what else. So we have some basic add font face support in CSS new, which was, I think, specifically added for this to work correctly. So loading a separate font here. I think Sam did the parsing, and then Andreas did some actual font loading. Luke did a change to include cookies in form submissions, which is obviously very important, because like sometimes cookies are used for certain tokens or authentications or stuff like that. We have a new user agent string this month, which might not seem like much, but user agents are obviously used for like feature detection sometimes, even though they shouldn't be. And so we used to include like KHTML and WebKit, so the names of two other engines here, just to like make other other servers not completely reject this browser. But now it's we relaxed it a bit. It still says Mozilla /5.0, which many browsers have, but also identifies itself as SerenityOS and Libweb and Lib.js and browser. All of these, also having a version here now. So that's certainly a nice change that Andreas did. And we also have some new user agent default styles. So if you have like a blank, that's one window. If you have like a blank page where it's just HTML and no custom styles, the user agent, so the browser, for example, will obviously still apply some default styles. And we have a bunch new ones. So for example, the abbreviation element will now show a little underline here if there's a title showing the full word. And the mark element is now highlighted in a yellow background. And the strike element is rendered with a strike through style. So things like this. It's little things, but sometimes a website will not necessarily override these styles and just assume that they do the right thing by default. So it's very important to get right. And this was done by Recha and some other folks. Let's have a look. What else? I've done some work on cross-origin checks. So specifically for iframes that they, child iframes that they cannot access certain things of the parent iframe, for example, the origin. And a demo of that and many other things can be seen in the latest community showcase. So if you want to check that out, it's linked in the description below. Right, what else? We have a bunch of CSS changes this month as well. So for example, Sam, as usual, has been done a ton of work on the CSS parser, adding support for new properties and new features like this is selector, which is basically a shortcut to avoid repeating certain elements. So if we have a look at the source here, special, so this applies to .special h2 and to .special p. And so you can see we have both a special class with h2 and a p. And these are all then matched by the selector and get a background color accordingly. And the same for where. The only difference is like the specificity. So just a small difference. And then Simon has been working on transforms. So unfortunately, this demo seems broken right now. I know it worked a couple of days ago, but basic CSS transforms where you can scale and rotate and translate an element to a different position, basically. And he also implemented Atra. So if we extend this demo, so say you have a style like this, and we have this abbreviation element up here, which has a title. So we could make another div here. And then we say div before, so that's a pseudo element. And then we can assign content to that, which is something Sam added, I think, last month. And finally, we query the attribute of that. Oh no, it doesn't work with type. So if I give this an attribute, foo equals bar, and then we say attribute foo, it's going to insert the value of that attribute into the pseudo element. So that's really cool for like dynamic insertion of content into a document just using styles. So yeah, that was implemented by Simon. And lastly, Daniel implemented case insensitive attribute selector. So here we have a div with an attribute foo equals uppercase bar. And so if we just say foo equals lowercase bar, that doesn't do anything. So it doesn't match the selector and doesn't apply a red background. But if we say I behind it, so like a little attribute here, that's for case insensitive, and then it matches any variation of bar. And so you can see it applies the style. And also Simon finished the implementation of the adoption agency algorithm, which you might not hear of, but it's a very important part of the HTML spec that deals with invalid, basically, HTML and unclosed tags and stuff like that. So if a website isn't super careful and has perfect HTML, that's going to play a big role. So that's now finished. It was previously only partially implemented. So yeah, a bunch of changes. Many more people have implemented small and large fixes and improvements, but we cannot demo everything. Many of the stuff was obviously targeted as at Asset 3. But yeah, really great work by everyone this month. And okay, something else I wanted to show you is some general improvements in the browser itself and not the underlying browser engine. So for example, in the inspect menu, we now have this open storage inspector, which opens a window showing all the cookies for that page. So for example, here we have 3 cookies for google.com, path / name, value, and then at the end, and expiry date and time. And so this was implemented by Rafal, so thank you for that. And in the future, we could show, for example, local storage here as well. And then we have some changes in the DOM inspector. So, for example, if we select this Google logo and go to box model, which is a term from the CSS spec itself, and also, so then we can see the inner size, for example, and see that it has some vertical padding, but no border and no margin. And this is obviously much easier than going to the computed styles and looking through all these values. And this was implemented by Michiel, so thank you for that. And then I think it was Simon who did graying out of elements that are not being actually rendered in the page. So for example, doc type here, or head, or the script element, which is useful to filter them out visually. And then Sam did a change in the DOM inspector for pseudo elements. So as you can see, we have here support for pseudo elements. So this is added using the content property in CSS only, so it's not actually in the HTML. And if we open the DOM inspector here and look a bit through that document, then you can see we have a paragraph and some text highlighted here, and then we have a before and an after pseudo element. So it's very useful to just see them opposed to not having them show up here. And then Andreas did a small change to enable content filtering by default. So we have some basic content filtering for ad blocking and tracking scripts and things like that. And now it's on by default. So something to keep in mind when certain resources are not appearing, for example. And then lastly, a small thing I added is support for disabling scripting. So let's see if we can find the test page for that. No script. So by default, scripting is enabled. And so if I load that page, it's going to show an alert. But if I go to debug and disable scripting and then load that page again, it's going to show the no script element on that page. So here we have script and no script. So this is also useful for debugging, or if you just like to disable JavaScript, which is totally fine, of course. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Linus. So the next thing I want to show you is Hack Studio. So let's go and look at a small project here. And I don't have compiler installed, but that's going to be okay. So new in Hack Studio this month is a find bar up here. You can bring it up with Control F. And if you search for something, it actually has search highlighting. And you can also step through the different matches here. And this was implemented by Itamar. And there's actually a few layers to this. So the find GUI is specific to Hack Studio, but the support for search highlighting is part of the text editor widget. So if we open up, let's say, something in text editor, and we search for the word and perhaps, you'll see that we have search highlighting here as well, just for free, because we're using the same text editing widget. Now, maybe we should find a way to unify the find bar as well somehow between these things. But even just the search highlighting is absolutely amazing. I'm really happy about that. And the way it works is that we now have sort of a set of spans that you can assign to a text document. And one layer of spans comes from the syntax highlighter. Syntax highlighter will say like, oh, this piece here should be that color, should be bold, stuff like that. And then you can attach a second span that also has the search highlighting information. And then you could attach more spans if you had other stuff to add on top of that. And then they just get merged by the editor widget. So very, very nice new feature. Super nice work by Itamar. And some other stuff, a random thing that I saw, which I liked that it happened, was that we now have the POSIX CMP command. This was implemented by Sam. So it's a simple command. Let me just show you what it does. So say that you have two text files. You can compare them with CMP and it will tell you, oh wait, that's not what I call them. It will tell you where they differ. So these two differ immediately at the beginning. So if you instead had foo in one and then maybe foobar in the other, you would get, it would tell you that they differ, and they differ starting at character number 4. So it's one of those many utilities that the POSIX specification says, oh, you got to have this. And it always makes me happy when people add these kind of things, so that it brings us closer to POSIX compatibility. So thank you very much, Sam, for working on that. And actually earlier, when I brought up Wikipedia, I wanted to mention that there has been a bunch of work on the crypto and TLS libraries this month. Michel has done some really nice work adding the SecP256R1 elliptic curve, and he also fixed a nasty bug in our crypto library that broke Wikipedia or made it very, very slow to load. Now it's a lot faster again, thanks to that. And Stellar 7 also added the X448 elliptic curve. So super awesome to see more support for more functionality in libcrypto and libTLS, which of course gives us access to more of the web. Something I am looking forward to in the near future is maybe supporting some more, even more stuff in libTLS, because Twitter decided that they want to require something from our TLS implementation in Scandinavia that we don't have. So whatever that is, looking forward to seeing that in the next month's video, perhaps. Anyway, let's also talk about some kernel stuff. So Linus did a bunch of kernel stuff this month, and he seemed to really enjoy himself. That was nice to see. So our CPU info blob has grown quite a bit. And actually, I guess I didn't need to be root for this, but so Linus has expanded on this feature set field here. So we basically ask the CPU about what kind of features it has, and then we publish those in a way that user space can look at them. And I think it also shows up here, I guess. Yeah, very, very cool. Very exhaustive list of features. And previously we showed just a tiny, tiny subset of all of the possible CPU features. So very nice of Linus to go ahead and find all these ones. And what else? Oh, yes, we now have address space layout randomization for the kernel, so KASLR, which basically means that when we boot up, we put the kernel at a slightly random location in memory. It's randomized within a small interval, but it's still better than like hard coding the location, which is what we were previously doing, which made some exploits trivial. Now, in addition to having to find an exploit, you also have to find some kind of info leak to figure out where in memory the kernel is before you can ROP into it or whatever you want to do. Of course, you can look in proc kernel base, and that tells you where in memory. That's just a decimal number, but only root can read this file. But we have it there so that if you do profiling, for example, then our profiler GUI can understand kernel addresses. But it's not accessible to normal users. Ta-da! Also, there's a bit of a weird background color here. Like, the terminal is not transparent underneath this part. I wonder what that's about. But that's definitely not something that we're gonna get distracted by now. For myself in the kernel this month, I worked a bunch on locking. So historically, we've had this big kernel lock that sort of prevents multiple threads from the same process from executing at the same time. And we are in the process of splitting up this lock and having more fine-grained locking. And I've done a bunch of work basically porting a bunch of syscalls over to fine-grained locking. Still a lot of syscalls remain, but it is nice. We are making progress on this. And it's a long-term architectural work that's going to benefit multi-core support. Yes. And Ali did a bunch of work on the kernel as well, which I really appreciated because he fixed a long-standing bug where FPU, or floating point state, was getting clobbered by signal dispatch. So that's really sweet. Thank you very much, Ali, for fixing that. So I think that's everything we had to show you today. Thank you all so much for checking in and staying up to date with our project. If you want to come chat or participate in development, do join the Discord server. There's a link to it in the video description below. I also have a weekly live stream here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. It's called SerenityOS Office Hours, and everybody's welcome to ask whatever you want to know about SerenityOS. And finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, you can find donation options for myself, for Linus, and for Sam in the video description below. So I'm working on this full-time since May of last year, thanks to the very generous support of many awesome people. So thank you all so much for that. All right, that's it for today. See you all next time.